You're listening to episode 294 of the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman. Is perfection overrated? Yes. Yes, it is, in every possible level. And on today's podcast, I'm going to chat to you about how perfection is not just overrated. It is actually the enemy of good. It's the enemy of progress. It is the enemy of achieving anything even near perfection, which I appreciate. I've said perfection a lot, but hear me out on this. I was asked to give my opinion, give my thoughts for a piece in Stylist last week about perfection. And it kind of set me down a bit of a rabbit hole about how we create our best work, what the idea behind perfection is, and why it's really, really limiting. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Basically, to do great, you need to drop perfect. And there's lots of good reasons why. Now, before we even get into the detail, I want to say this is not an excuse for crappy work. I don't want you thinking, this doesn't mean I need to work hard anymore. Just put any old rubbish out into the world, all will be well. That is absolutely not, in capital letters, what this is all about. There is somebody who I feel is Jenna Kutcher, who says done is better than perfect. And I think that is good, but I think it can be expanded on a bit as well. Because for people who are perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, when that phrase is seen, they think, and this is why we need to be perfect. Because done isn't better than perfect. Done just means that a process has been followed. It doesn't mean it's been followed well or with care or attention or with diligence. And that is not what this podcast is about. So when I was asked to give a quote about perfection and about whether it limits work, limits actually achievement, and whether it can be damaging for work, I kind of started doing a fair bit of research on perfection. And there's lots of different types of perfection. And some pieces I read listed loads and loads of different types. But the thing that I really saw was the three main types. One is when you expect yourself to be perfect, when you think that anything less than perfect is a failure, and you push yourself incredibly hard to achieve perfection. What this can also mean is that you are in search of perfection. You're in search of this magical, mystical thing, and you always stop yourself from pushing on because you don't believe what you've created or your thought process is perfect. So let's say you're writing something and you want it to be perfect, and you've written it. It's like it's a blog post. You've written it and you're looking at it and you're thinking, actually, this isn't good. This isn't as good as it can be. This is not what I deem to be perfect. Now, what if you're in that mindset, you'll probably do is not publish it because you don't believe it's good enough. What that then does is it kind of reinforces your belief in this. But the key is that it doesn't get out into the world. So whatever you're trying to say, whatever you've thought is important enough to write about, you're not going to release it into the world because you've decided it's not as good as it has to be. We're going to come back to that. Another one is that you can believe that society expects perfection from you. Society, your community, your work colleagues, your clients, that they expect perfection. And I think it's fair to say that if you're working for someone on like a client basis, they're your client, they do expect you to be good and they expect minimal mistakes. But also people are human. And I would also imagine that they would rather that the work was done. Let's say you're writing something for them and you're submitting it. We're sticking with writing today. That it's good. It's very, very good, than it's what you think of as perfect. Things like typos are incredibly annoying, but there are things you can do to check them. I mean, thank God for Word and its little red squiggle. Although sometimes it doesn't really like the British spellings of things, much preferring the American, but at least we can work around that. And sometimes, because if you put, I don't know, a word like the and you meant then, it's not going to know because that's still a word. So mistakes do happen. Obviously, the idea is to really limit those mistakes. And we're going to obviously touch on that as well. But if you believe society, the community, your work colleagues expect perfection of you, that can be massively, massively limiting to output, to how you feel, to your mental state, to actually so much. And the thing is, it's a horrible situation because it fuels itself, and not in a good way. It can really create a downward spiral that you don't want to be getting on. And the other one is when people expect perfection of others. So if you expect everything that everybody does to be perfect, then this isn't entirely fair. Now, obviously, there are some things when you look and you go, well, clearly this is not perfect. This is actually nowhere near perfect. This is a joke. And that is not what we're talking about here. This podcast is not for those who do not give 100%, who do not put in effort, who do not want to be exceptional. But it is for people who need to perhaps let go of things. And one of the things that I come back to, which actually links nicely to this, is that perfection is subjective. So what I think of as perfect, you might not. If, going back to the writing example, I write things in a very specific way. I know how I write. I know my tone. If I'm reading someone else's work, I might not think it is perfect. And I've kind of measured that, I guess, by my standards. Like, you might not think that what I write is perfect, and you're probably right. You are right, let's be honest. But it's unfair to judge it by your worldview. So I'm reading a book at the moment, which is like a bestseller loads of times over. I'm not going to say what it is. It's a fiction, though, which is unlike me. I decided to dip my toe into the fiction side. Honestly, I'm regretting it. It's not what I expected. But this book has got so many, like thousands and thousands and thousands of 5-star reviews. People think it's brilliant, witty, funny, entertaining, amazing. Genuinely, I do not love it at all. I don't think it's well written. I haven't laughed yet. I'm not entertained. I'm just a bit cross with the whole thing. Now, to me, that book is not perfect, but to somebody else it is. So it is subjective. It depends on the person's viewpoint. So for me to think that my version of perfect is better than other people's and then making them fall in line with what I think, that's a bit of a tricky one, And particularly when it comes to work output, I think, if you've got a really unique way of saying things, writing things, drawing things, visualizing things, developing things, there's the right and the wrong for things. But there's also a large area in the middle, which is very much down to how we all perceive it. So that's a bit harsh. So perfection's subjective, which is very difficult because it means there's no end. It means you can't say, brilliant, I'm there, because you can always do better. We can always improve. And that is what I would encourage you to look for instead of perfection, because that's just a waste of everyone's time, most of all yours. And it will not free up the available capacity you have to do really, really, really good work. If we drop perfection, if we go for exceptional work, excellent work, really, really good work, that makes it more accessible and it gives us something to aim for. Also, if we say we're going to do our best work, as in the work that is best for us, really, really good work, that doesn't stop progress. And this is one of the things I see is really negative about perfection, is it stops progress. So you want to put something across, you want to send an email, you want to write a thing, you want to record a thing, and you stress and agonize that it's not going to be perfect. So what you do is you might start it, but you're not finishing it. And if you finish it, you're not publishing it or sharing it or doing what you wanted to achieve. So I'd argue strongly that that means it isn't perfect because it hasn't achieved the objective. The objective would be to tell someone something or educate someone about something. And because you haven't pushed it into the world, it is a failure, which I would say is the opposite of perfect. And the thing that bothers me the most is when it just stops that progress. It stops that progression, because then we can't look at it, critically review it and improve on it. We also can't review it positively, reflect on it and see what was good about it, because we haven't given it chance to do its thing. So do your best work. Review, reflect, have a ponder, get someone else to read it through, get someone else to listen. Obviously, I've connected a lot of this to writing, because I thought that was just quite a useful example and an easy example that I think most of us can relate to, whether it's a caption or a blog or an email or a book or a whatever. So you can do your very best work. And another thing I would advise people, if they're kind of stuck in this loop, is to go through a process. So going back to writing again, if I'm writing something, unless I need to do it and it is super important and super urgent, I would always much rather write something on one day and review it the next, because I will see more mistakes this next day. Sometimes I also read it out of order. If I'm looking for typos rather than flow, I will read different paragraphs in a different order to try and trick myself to read it better. There's lots of different ways you can review it. And I would say to you, find a system that allows you to review what you're doing, whatever you are trying to achieve perfection in, and think, what things could you put in place that would allow you to push the button and progress further? Because every big goal we want, we know we break this down into micro goals. We know micro goals have actionable steps. So what are the actionable steps that you're doing, and what is the process for checking those steps that allows you to move it on, tick it, press publish, whatever, and get it out into the world? And then don't think of it as a success or a failure. Think of it as a learning exercise. So we've got this, and now we're going to do what? We're going to look at, could it be improved from any different perspective? What's the feedback we're getting? What has gone well? What hasn't gone well? What could be improved? What stuff do we want to take through to the next thing because it did really, really well? But if we have more of an experimental mindset on the work we do, it creates better outcomes moving forward, because everything we do is better and improving, rather than one thing that's taken us a year to do and it's kind of mediocre, or we never even put it out there anyway. We talked about what we believe society expects from us. We are putting ourselves under an insane amount of pressure, and often unfounded. You know, we can worry so much about what people think of us in general terms, and really people are far more concerned about themselves than they are about you. I think one example of this is actually like in the way we dress, or the clothes we wear, or how we look. We'll analyse this kind of wrinkle on our forehead or a bit of straggly grey hair, and others won't notice it. And if they do, they don't care. But I know how easy it is to get into this loop of being incredibly self-critical and worrying what people will think, and thinking people expect things of us that are just not realistic. So again, we need to adopt a different mindset on that. If we think it's to do with other people's worldview, is that any of our business? We can't influence them. They don't know the whole story. Why are we so consumed by this? It's an interesting point, I think. And we've obviously touched on expecting perfection of others and how that is not terribly reasonable. We all have things that we're good at, things that we're not so good at, but trying to measure up to someone else's idea of perfection is hard. Very, very hard. And the last point is that what's perfect can change in a matter of minutes. When things update, when things improve, it can change. Situations can change. So what was perfect a few moments ago may not be with latest developments. And then you've spent so long agonizing about it, it never got a chance to see the light of day because you were so obsessed with it. So we need to drop perfect as a possibility. we need to embrace good, great, exceptional, I think, our best work at that point with the available resources and time and energy that we have. Because if we're aiming for this thing that is just not achievable, we're going to limit any potential for our own personal growth, for the growth of our company, for anything that's positive. And we're doing that because we're trying to go after this fictitious thing, this kind of genie, this magical, mystical unicorn of a creature that doesn't exist. So let's aim for great. Let's come up with processes that allow us to push on with great. And then let's analyze the great and look for those things that will make us even greater next time, knowing that we will always be able to be better. But there's a balance that has to be struck between action, between output, between our sanity, between the rest of our workload, between getting the message out there and everything else. So please, join me and let's ditch this. It's not helpful, it's not productive, and it isn't going to get you anywhere near you want to be. I hope that's giving you some food for thought. It's a subject that people have said, progress over perfection, all this stuff on social, all these like memes and fun quotes. But that's great. But that's like telling someone just not to do something that they've done forever and they're just hardwired for it. You can unwire yourself, hardwire. I feel like hardwire means permanent, but you can change that. That's the beauty of how the brain works. We can teach ourselves new things. That's how habits are formed. And it is a case of breaking out of the system that you've used forever and adopting something that's better for you. And I'd love to know if you've tried this, what your plan is, what your strategy is, what your process is that allows you to progress with projects when you are desperate to cling on to that it could be better or it could be more perfect. If you've got a couple of moments free, I would love you to rate and review this podcast as well. It means so much. It helps people find the podcast. It helps people know it's good. And I'd love you to do that on whatever platform you listen to. Thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate your time as always, and I'm sure we will catch up very, very soon. Bye.